have ASL interpretation available today. If you need ASL interpretation, there are 2 ASL interpreters. If you would like to pin your ASL interpreter, there are 3 dots at the top right corner of the image: ASL interpreter 1 and ASL interpreter 2. Please feel free to select the 3 dots and pin the ASL interpreter. We do have to give the announcement that we will be recording today's presentation, and we will go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This is Multnomah County Aging, Disabilities, and Veteran Services Division Community Services Workshop number 2. What are the administrative needs? We're starting at 11 a.m. promptly to provide enough time to give as much educational resources as we can. I'm excited today to have all of my fellow colleagues to support the work that we are doing in presenting this information today. At this time, I'm going to ask each one of the presenters to unmute and to show video, and we will go in order by the list that is on our presentation slide, starting out with a name and a title and the role within this presentation and project. The first is Irma Jimenez. Pronouns as well will be great.
Good morning. My name is Irma Jimenez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Division Director for Aging, Disability, and Veteran Services.
And I'm Aria Mormon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm project manager for this community services RFPQ project, and I'm going to hand it off to Emily.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Emily Barrett, Program Manager under Community Services, Aging, Disability, Veteran Service Division, and I use she, her pronouns. And I will hand it off to Joanne O'Connell.
Thank you for the introduction, Emily. I am Joanne O'Connell. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the contract liaison connected to this RFPQ. And I will pass it off to Joshua Quantz.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Joshua Quantz. I prefer he and him pronouns, and I am the interim privacy coordinator for the Department of County Human Services, and I will pass it along to Lynn.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Lynn Shemer-Valou. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a program manager with Multnomah County Aging, Disability, and Veteran Services on the Community Services team, and I oversee many of the programs that are part of this RFPQ process. And I am going to pass it off to Margreta.
Thank you, Lynn. Good morning, everyone. My name is Margreta Hansen. I am a program supervisor here in Aging, Disability, and Veteran Services Community Services, and I supervise the team that handles a lot of the administrative needs related to the contracts that are part of this RFPQ process. I use she, her pronouns. Glad that you are here, and I will pass it along to Marina Kalina. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Marina Kalina. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm a senior program manager for Community Services program at Aging, Disability, and Veteran Services Division. And I will pass it to Nisi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanisi. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the office assistant here supporting this RFPQ.
Thank you all for that lovely and fluid introduction. I'm going to provide an overview of today's agenda. We are going to start out with the welcome, which will include a message from our leadership, overview key presentation terms, and as well as looking at the RFPQ background and contracts evolution, and wanting to hear from all of our lovely guests today. With that, let's go ahead and do a welcome message from our leadership, Irma Jimenez. And as that is happening, we would love if you would enter into the chat your pronouns, your name, and your organization.
Thank you, Aria. Again, Irma Jimenez, Division Director for Aging, Disability, and Veteran Services. Thank you all for being here today. I just want to do a quick introduction and then I will pass it on to our presenters for today. Here at Multnomah County, we are continuously committed to examining the ways our policies, procedures, practices, and organizational culture contribute to injustice and institutional racism, as well as opportunities for fairness, inclusion, belonging, and community well-being for all. Our goal is to use strategies to target resources that are culturally responsive and appropriate to our communities most negatively impacted by systemic racism, health equities, and barriers to opportunities, and to advance positive outcomes for all of our residents. If your agency provides services to older adults, family caregivers, and adults with disabilities in your community, and you are interested in learning more about how to partner and contract with ADVSD, you are in the correct workshop. Services your organization may qualify for funding includes case management, family caregiver support, nutrition services, both congregate meals and home delivered meals, health promotion activities, and providing information, referrals, support, and connection to services or service coordination. We hope to see you soon at one of our upcoming events. The ADVSD Community Services team is looking forward to providing information on the administrative needs when contracting with us and answering your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irma. We're so excited to have your leadership, and we're so excited to be able to provide these resources to the community. At this time, we are going to go ahead and move forward into today's workshop. Thank you so much for everyone who has entered their information into the chat. If you're just now joining us, we ask that you add your name, your pronouns, and your organization so that we can stay engaged. The key terms for today's workshops are as listed. We want to ensure that everyone has a thorough definition of what we will be talking about today. So let's go ahead and go through some of the terms. RFPQ for us is the request for programmatic qualifications. And it is for us a way of being able to create a pool of qualified applicants. Community Services Mega RFPQ is our nickname for the funding event. And it has to do with our community services for older adults. People with disabilities, for our definition purposes, refers to funding. And this refers to adults who have physical disabilities and who are not served by intellectual disability services. AAA, otherwise known as AAA, is Area Agency on Aging. OAA is Older Americans Act. ADRC is Aging and Disability Resource Connection. REAL-D is race, ethnicity, language, and disability consumer data that is collected. Match is the contractor's contribution, which is in addition to the total allocated amount for services. And subsidy, additional services units provided without reimbursement, and it will be listed as subsidy on invoices. And HIPAA, good old HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. We know that you cannot recall all of these different definitions during the presentation. So we have someone that will be adding this information into the chat for us so that you can review it as we are going through this presentation. Thank you so much for enduring that long list of definitions. And next, we will talk about the Community Services RFPQ background. In our project charter, we had it occur March 26, 2020. And what we wanted to do was have a goal to simplify the RFPQ application process and ensure that funding is fully expended each fiscal year. And our major philosophy of the OAA is that preventative and supportive services should help older people to maintain their independence and be available to all persons and their families. And to provide a more robust background, the Multnomah County Aging, Disabilities, and Veteran Service Division is a designated area agency on aging for Multnomah County. And AAAs, otherwise known as AAAs, are funded by the state under the Federal Older Americans Act. and it's responsible for planning, leadership, advocacy, coordination, and delivery of OAA services for all older Americans living in the service area. As an area agency on aging, disabilities, and veteran services is required by OAA to designate community focal points to be the community contact points through which older persons gain access to information and services. We look forward to providing you with more details on how you can interact with the county and provide these services. And now we will have a contracts evolution to provide more background and understanding of how we got to the point where we are today in our contracting. And at this time, I will welcome my lovely colleague, Lynn Shimmerfalou, to give us that overview. Lynn?
Thanks, Aria. So in order to kind of better understand where we're going, sometimes it's nice to look back on where we have been. And so giving a little bit of context of this evolution over time, back in 2011, we had our district senior centers through the Older Americans Act services, providing OPI, Oregon Project Independence, and evidence-based health promotion services. We had our nutrition providers. And at that time, we were working with our planner at that time to look at the possibility of working collaboratively with cultural specific organizations. And so we started a small pilot program to look at if we could successfully contract and collaborate with cultural specific organizations to provide some of these services. And we dedicated about 10% of our budget to that. We worked closely with those organizations. We had an advisory council that we were working with to kind of guide this process and develop some systems. And that turned out to be successful. So during our next round of contracting, when we were getting ready to go out for release our RFPQ, we decided we wanted to make a more intentional effort to provide more funding and more options of services on the menu for our cultural specific services. We started by having an advisory council, some community sessions to hear from the community around the unique needs of cultural specific groups in Multnomah County. We use that information to guide our decision-making process and as we were planning and gearing up to release that RFPQ. And where we landed was the goal of dedicating about 38% of our funding for culturally specific contracts, organizations that met the criteria as being culturally specific to provide those services to older adults and family caregivers in the community. And again, 38% of our budget is what we were committed to using towards those contracts. Let's go on to the next slide, please. And so that's when we released that RFPQ, that was the goal of that procurement. We were successful in contracting with cultural specific organizations. We also had our cultural responsive organizations to provide district senior center services, nutrition services, as well as health promotion services. Those district centers in the community continue to serve as a community focal point in the different regions of the county. Our enhancing equity or culturally specific contracts are providing more services through that contracting process than they did in that pilot program. And so this has all proved to be successful in both the Older Americans Act programming, in Oregon Project Independence programming, nutrition services, and health promotion services. And so we have taken what we've learned from 2018 to 2022, and we have incorporated those elements into our RFPQ process that we're currently about to release right now. We are improving and expanding those contracts. We have a focus on the equity lens being applied throughout all aspects of this, through our service equity work, through the review of the program model, through the questions that we're writing for the RFPQ, and as we move towards the contracting process. process. We are working to reduce barriers. And that includes in this presentation and this learning session today, as we're gearing up to release this RFPQ in a couple of months and move into contracts in 2024. Thank you. Okay, so speaking of contracts, let's move into our administrative needs, kind of the goal of this presentation today. And so we're going to be talking here around setting a rate. So things to consider when you are engaging with Multnomah County during the contract negotiations process to establish your rate. So let's move into this slide. So I'm going to set a little bit of context. As you're thinking about your budget for the RFPQ and potential contract, remember this is a fee-for-service contract. The funding that we have is a mix of federal, state, county, or local funding, and that amount of funding that we have is finite. This is the money that we have to put into contracts. And as we know, the community need and the ability of your agency might exceed the amount of funding that we have. So that being said, once we move into the contract negotiation part of the process, we will discuss service goals for serving your community, and this will include a target goal for the number of people supported for the different services and programs, such as nutrition services, evidence-based health promotion, or a caseload for Oregon Project Independence, things like that. Those would be discussed and kind of worked through in that contract negotiation phase. As I stated earlier, we know that the demand for the support that is needed will certainly exceed our annual funding, and especially if there are no additional resources available. So for some services, you might maintain a wait list, and for some services, you may be required to continue to provide the service, even if you have expended your contract budget amount for that service. And an example of that would be OPI, Oregon Project Independence case management. You would be expected to continue to case manage the clients that you have on your caseload, even if you have expended the funding in the contract. And we'll talk a little bit about subsidy in a bit. We will monitor the level of service that your agency is providing to help support you and sustain that funding throughout the fiscal year, and the number of people who are waiting for services. And this will help to inform additional support that you may need and inform future budget planning. So that being said, let's talk about some considerations for establishing your rate. So each service will have negotiated rates. So if you are providing information and referral, case management, a rate per meal if you are providing nutrition services, all of those different services will have an established rate that we will negotiate with you. When you're thinking about your budget, and the expected level of service and the staff that you will need to deliver those services, here are some important things to consider. Think about the type of employee or the job classification that's needed to do the work and your agency's salary structure for that classification. Think about the staff salary and that fully loaded amount, so including benefits, payroll taxes, workers' comp insurance, things like that. Think about the productivity of that person, the person in the job doing the work, and how much time will be spent doing tasks or work that is a billable unit of service, and how much time will be spent on other tasks that are not billable units of service. For example, a case manager who works directly with clients and narrates their work, therefore justifying the number of billable units that are submitted in an invoice. You may determine that when you factor in staff meetings, training, county meetings, other tasks, that about 75% of that case manager's time is spent on direct client work and billable units of service. and 25% of their time is spent on work for related tasks that are not billable units of service. And so using that productivity of 75%, that's something to consider when you're developing your rate. That full-time employee has about 75% of their time that is spent on billable units. Another thing to think about is your admin or overhead. So think about the services that you're contracted with, for example, case management. Consider the cost of hiring, training, retaining a case manager in your agency. What about the manager or supervisor who oversees that person and their time spent on this work? What about the equipment for the employee, a laptop, a headset? Those things that are all considerations when you are developing your rate. Typical things that are listed as general administrative expenses would also include things like rent or utilities, insurance, executive managers, supervisors, wages and benefits. We talked about that. Time spent supervising that staff. Also think about your privacy officer or privacy compliance requirements such as training. And our privacy officer, Joshua Quantz, will talk more about that later in this session. What about the depreciation of office fixtures and equipment, legal counsel, the accounting staff who create your monthly invoice, and their percent of their time that is spent on this work, office supplies, all things to think about for that administrative overhead expense. The county and the Department of County Human Services have a maximum allowable admin overhead rate. And there's more information about this in our program model, and there'll be detailed information about this in the RFPQ application in the budget section. The county will negotiate a rate with you based on the rate range that you propose and the county's budget available. All those considerations, such also our service goals, are factored into that in that negotiation. So all things to be thinking about as you're preparing your budget and thinking about that contracting time. Let's move on to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about match and subsidy. So let's first talk about match. So all contractors providing services in this RFPQ will be required to provide some level of match in their budget. The match is the contractor's, your contribution, and is in addition to the total allocated amount for services. The entire match must be for services that are awarded through this procurement and can be generated from the following, and this list is not all inclusive. So think about donated supplies. Perhaps your agency has a way to obtain donations of walkers and wheelchairs and incontinence supplies, and that you distribute those to older adults that you're serving in these programs. Perhaps you have work performed by volunteers or interns, and we use the value that is established by the independent sector for Oregon, and that's valued at about $29.75 an hour if you're looking at an intern or a volunteer working on these programs. You may have donated professional services for programming. You might have cash match from fundraising or grant sources that directly support this contracted work. Let's talk a little bit about subsidy. So as I said earlier, contractors may provide more services than can be reimbursed for by the county's allocation. And in some cases, as I mentioned, you might be required to continue to provide services even if you have expended your funding. We require that agencies report these units of subsidy on their monthly invoice. And Margreta will talk more about this in another slide that's coming up. So if you've got more questions, hold on to them. Margreta will cover that when we're talking about that monthly invoice. So if we are able to, there are times where we can backfill or convert some of those units of subsidy into paid units. It's not guaranteed and it does not happen all the time, but reimbursement for subsidy depends on the availability of funds that can be used for the specific services, and ADVSD determines the best use of those funds to benefit the community. So you may have some funding in another line item of service that has unrestricted funds, so something that could be used to pay for another line item of service. And so we work with our partners very closely on that as you're moving through the contract period of time with us. So subsidies that cannot be reimbursed or made into cash or paid units include subsidy that is used to meet the match requirements, a subsidy where the contractor used federal funds to provide that service. In any situation where the reimbursement would result in being double paid or paid twice for the same service, we would not be able to do that. Also, subsidies when it is the unit rate that has a subsidy. So for example, if your rate with us is $50 per unit, but you're saying it really costs you $55 per unit, that $5 difference would not be something that we would be able to reimburse you for in subsidy. Okay, there are also some line items of service that are not eligible for subsidy and county reimbursing the agency for that subsidy. And this would include subsidy for services that are paid on a monthly allotment, such as focal point and transportation scheduling and coordination. So again, that's a lot to absorb and a lot to think about. Keep in mind this session is being recorded and the slides will be available to review also. And we're going to move on to the next topic. So I am going to spend a minute introducing these required databases. So we're switching gears here a little bit. How do you do this work? So this slide is just to give you a brief introduction of these databases, and then we'll go into further detail on these in future slides. So based on services that you may be providing, the following databases are required. And as I mentioned, Marina and Emily are going to talk more about the training on these databases and about the programs for these databases. I just wanted to introduce them to you and also cite the source of these databases or who the owner is of these databases. So you have a better understanding of what we do here in Multnomah County as the AAA and programs and services that are a part of the statewide network of AAAs throughout all of Oregon. So you will be hearing more about Oregon Access, which is a statewide database, GetCare, also a statewide database, UCR or Universal Client Registry, and that is a Multnomah County developed web-based database. The ADRC call module, part of the statewide network and the statewide database, and Compass, which is a statewide database used for health promotion, scheduling, and tracking of classes and participation. And so I'm going to now pass it over to Marina, who's going to go into a little bit more details.
Yes, hello everyone. Aria, could you please, or Tennessee, can you start my video? Okay, because I'm blocked a little bit on the video. I apologize. All right, thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me too and see me now. Thank you. Can you move? Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Right. As Lynn mentioned in the previous slide that she reviewed required databases, we also will review the required training. On your slide that is in front of you right now, you see 4 service areas, and it's basically the system that the systems and training are relevant to. Each area also has an indicator, or a little symbol that shows if the MALTCO or the state are providing the training for this. If you look at the first one, information and referral. There is going to be the AIRS certification within a year, and the training on Real D collection and Get Care training. So those are the required training for this service area. If you're looking at the second one, is the OPI case management. So we are going to look and require, it's a state training, and there would be narration standards training, also Oregon Access System training, and that training is done by Multnomah County staff or the state. So the third area where the required training is going to happen is options counseling. And that training to become an option counsel done strictly by the state, and some of the staff of the Multco can also assist with that training. And family caregiver support program that is done by Multnomah County program specialist. Could we go to the next slide? So we're going to continue on the same required training here. Additional required training would be for billing and invoicing. That training is going to be on the UCR system that Lynn mentioned, and it is going to be with our Multnomah County team. Transportation program, it is UCR training and support from program specialists from Multnomah County. As you see on this slide, the little triangle indicates training completed by Multnomah County, and the orange circle indicates training completed by the state. So we're going for the area number 7, and it's a nutrition training with Multnomah County program specialists. So you got here 3 areas that specifically provided by our community services program specialist. And the health promotion is the 8th area, service area. Your organization's program manager for health promotion will be required to train with our Multnomah County program specialist, and that will be done in the COMPASS database. There are several evidence-based health promotion classes or workshops that must be led by a credentialed leader, either in your agency or the community. And the credentialing varies depending on the evidence-based health promotion class or course your agency intends to provide to consumers. Next, please go to the next slide. Next, I will review the meeting attendance requirements. So we, as communication is super important with all the community partners, we would like to support your work and also have our, open communication when we, talk about either processes or supporting you with, training, thinking about some innovation. And so we set up quite a few meetings here that we are inviting you to keep that communication flow. And it's a quarterly partner meeting. We are going to ask that we will have quarterly case manager meeting. We also have quarterly information and referral meeting, quarterly nutrition provider network meeting, quarterly health promotion provider network meeting. So these are ways that your agency and your team is connected to our network of providers for ongoing support, learning, best practices, sharing, and planning. These meetings are an important part of how we all work together to serve the community. So these meetings are also a way for each of you to get to know about the other agencies and the unique services they also provide. And we are going to the next slide, and Margareta will review the invoicing requirements that we mentioned when we talk about systems in the training. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marina. I want to go ahead and give us a quick pivot point and thank everyone who has joined us. For those who have just joined us, we will have this recording available online for you to catch the information. So no worries, you did not miss anything. It will all be made available. At this time, I just wanted to give you a quick recap of everything that we've chatted about so far. We gave you a contracts evolution background. We also talked about setting a rate, as well as talked about match and subsidy, and then talked about the databases, as well as the trainings within those databases, and then the meetings and attendance requirements. And at this time, we will have Margareta to present invoicing requirements. Hi, Margareta. We will unmute and get her going.
Thank you, Aria. Appreciate that recap. Yes, let's move into the invoicing requirements. So for contractors, our community partners that hold contracts with us, they submit a monthly invoice to report all contracted services, and they use a template that we create and share that's provided by Multnomah County. Invoices are typically due depending on the contract type and the negotiation. They are due either on the 5th, 7th, or 10th working day of the month. So that's not including holidays or weekends, and so the services are completed through the month, for example, of March 2020, 2023, then the invoices are submitted in the following month in April on that 5th, 7th, or working day. Monthly invoices and deliverables, which are also templates provided by community services, are submitted electronically. We have a shared inbox that those are all sent to. And the deliverables are backup reports, which, depending on the services in your contracts you are providing, they list the quantity of services, the clients that receive those services, and those things need to reconcile to the invoice in order for a timely remittance of payment for those services. The data on the deliverable backup reports that detail the services provided are pulled from some of the different systems that have been referenced previously in the slides, such as GetCare, which pulls the options counseling services. UCR also includes some of the case management services. So those reports detail the clients and services provided per your contract. And as I mentioned before, they must reconcile in order for us to move forward in the payment process and approval process here. Lynn mentioned the subsidy. The invoice template that is submitted to us on a monthly basis does include the information regarding the subsidy for different services and must fall in that criteria. And that is very important information because we record that information, and then we do report that up to our funders. So that is that's the invoicing requirements for our community partners, our contractors. And I think we are taking a pause here, Aria. Yes?
We are. We're going to give an opportunity with all of the information that was just provided to chat a little bit about some of the questions that the group might have. There is a Q&A button. If you can please enter your questions into the Q&A, which is next to the chat function. We greatly appreciate it. We look forward to answering your questions. At this time, I see one question from Scott Moore. It says, on the match, can staff positions pointed to the funded program be covered by our general funds? And I welcome all of the administrative staff that is present to answer the question, whether it be answering live within the Q&A chat or unmuting and answering for Scott. on the match can staff positions pointed to the funded program be covered by our general funds?
This is Lynn, and so if what that means is that a staff position that is working on these services that are part of the contract, if that position is funded by the agency's general fund, not by funds coming through this contract, can that be counted as match? Yes, that can be counted as match.
Thank you, Lynn. Are there any additional questions at this time regarding the information that has been provided thus far? All right, at this time, we're going to go ahead and give everybody a 5-minute break. We will be back at 11:46. Thank you so much, everyone. See you shortly. I'm resuming the recording at this time. At this time, we're going to have an overview of the background check process, which will be presented by Joanne O'Connell. Thank you so much, Joanne.
Thank you, Aria. We require Orchard's background checks for staff and volunteers as one way for us to protect our community of older adults and people with disabilities. We protect personal information to support a person's privacy. I'm talking about name, social security number, date of birth, home address, and phone number. We know that that information can be used to perpetrate fraud, to steal someone's identity. And so we want to protect people's information that we have access to. We also have to consider personal safety. Older adults may become more dependent and vulnerable to the influence of others as they age. As service providers, our goal is to support older adults and people with disabilities to keep them free from harm. Several common types of reported abuse include physical, emotional, sexual, and/or financial abuse, and also neglect, which can be neglect from another or self-neglect. This short list comprises acts a person could commit towards an elder or an individual with disabilities. Requiring background checks aids us in hiring staff and supporting volunteers with no reported history of divulging protected personal information and no history of abuse or neglect. I think the next slide up is Emily's.
Thank you, Joanne, for the overview of the background check process. We will have Emily Burnt to give an overview of required demographics.
Thank you, Joanne. Hi, everybody. So I'm Emily, and required demographics. Starting in 2014 and ending in 2020, the Oregon legislature passed multiple bills that require Oregon Department of Human Services and Oregon Health Authority to develop and implement a data collection plan and roll it out. So in 2020, it has been rolled out. It is the Real D, as we all have heard about the Real D. So it's the standards across the board for all programs to collect, record, report demographic data to healthcare providers. And this is Real D stands for race, ethnicity, language, and disability information. Multnomah County contracts with the state of Oregon, and it requires us as part of the ADRC network and as the AAA network to collect real data on consumers who are engaged with us. So this contract requires that our partner agencies collect real information. And this information is recorded in the GetCare database for information referrals, calls, as well as options counseling programs. Collecting real information helps us understand who is most impacted by health inequities and how we best support these community members access the services and resources they need to be healthy and thrive. So I will hand this off to the next slide or to my next partner, and that would be Joshua. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. So I am going to talk at a very high level about privacy requirements as a contractor. So these basic ideas are sometimes described as the pillars of a compliance or privacy program, and they vary depending on who you ask. But in my opinion, these are the most important. Designate one champion, have written policies and procedures, provide staff training, report your privacy incidences, and have privacy breach guidelines. So designate one person to be in charge. This is hugely important as all of the other steps follow from this one. A privacy program requires buy-in from every person in the organization, but there needs to be an individual that takes ultimate responsibility for the program. And one of the things that makes that person a little bit different is they have to put integrity and privacy and client information first ahead of the organization. Most of the time, you don't want employees thinking of anything except the success of the organization. But in the case of the person responsible for privacy and compliance actually have to be their goal. Major questions an organization will ask itself, like, are we a covered entity or a business associate? Is this data subject to HIPAA, OSIPA, or other laws? Get answered by this person. They will be the key to developing policies, reporting, and investigating incidents. And they're also going to help establish a culture of compliance throughout the organization. So one of those important steps was having written policies and procedures, and they should make it clear what is expected of staff, as well as what tools are going to be provided by the organization. So some important categories of policies to have in place are privacy training requirements, including a refresher training, expectations on the use of technology and social media, and clear rules on how information is stored, retained, transmitted. And then, because all of our processes and rules are based on rules and laws from the state and federal level, it's also important to be aware when those rules and laws are changed. And your policies and procedures need to be updated in kind, and your staff needs to be trained on those changes in a timely manner. And speaking of the timing of training, one of the keys is to have your staff trained before they interact with confidential information, and then keep them trained. So any person that is going to interact with protected information, either internal or external, has to receive training about their responsibilities. You can't hold somebody to account for something that you haven't told them to do. Staff have to understand what's expected of them, especially in regards to protecting information in all the different forms that it may exist, including oral, spoken information. An untrained workforce member is not exempt from privacy responsibilities, but they are going to have a tough time meeting them. One of the things that's super important in setting up a privacy program is making it easy for staff, clients, folks from the outside to report issues and concerns. All staff members must know how to report a privacy incident, either by being familiar with the person in charge or the procedures set up, or by having access to a well-publicized hotline or email that's staffed by the privacy individual or team. So in addition to collecting reports, one of the most important things an organization has to do is make it clear that there is no retaliation for reporting, including for self-reports. This is different from a disciplinary action that comes about because of an event. That's always going to be the case if improper action can and may lead to disciplinary action. But reporting of an incident, including reporting an incident that you were a part of yourself, should never, ever involve any retaliation. The fact of the matter is, most of the time, people who've been involved in events like this feel terrible about it, and they need your support more than anything else. And the last thing I want to say on the topic of disciplinary guidelines is that it's incredibly important that these are across the board and they apply to every individual within the organization. There need to be clear consequences of actions or behavior that lead to privacy incidences and breaches, and every person in the organization must be held to the same standard from the entry level to executive. So thank you very much.
We're in unison. Thank you so much, Joshua, for providing the privacy requirements. And this is just best practices. Along with that, we also have some other risk and security best practices. We are aware that everyone operates their internal IT different, and these are just things to consider as you're trying to avoid any risk scenarios that were described by Joshua. Just think about the mobile device security policy and also thinking about protective technology. We want to make sure that you're also thinking about backup and recovery processes and protective technology so that we can ensure that there's not intrusion by any viruses or malware, as well as thinking about a data retention policy. All of these are very important in terms of making sure that you're protecting, as well as thinking about the risk as it relates to the equipment that's being used to support the clients. And so at this time, we just wanted to thank you all for being a part of this community workshop, very high level of the administrative needs. We wanted to ensure that you have this information as you were preparing to develop your proposals. And at this time, we want to ask everyone to participate in our survey in order to gain more information on how this workshop was helpful in giving you more knowledge and skills to submit a proposal, as well as wanting to stay engaged. We have another workshop coming, which is going to be very pivotal, and we're talking about equity in contracting. At this time, we have a survey that is launching in the chat. If you can please take a moment to complete that survey, click on the link, open it in another browser at your leisure. Please give it back to us when you're able to. If we don't hear from you, we'll send an email and just hope that you'll be able to get that back to us. And we're going to end with a Q&A session, as well as answering any additionals that may have not been thought of. In order to make sure this is an inclusive experience, we do ask that you put your question in the chat. And if you're unable to put your question into the chat, yes, you can unmute. We ask that you speak as loud as you're able to and slow enough for us to be able to capture the information. Giving it about one more minute to see if there's any additional questions. And if there are some that come after, we do have an email account. Lynn, can you please add the email account to the chat? If there are follow-up questions, thank you, Lynn. Please do send us an email. We can communicate with any potential or current suppliers up until the Mega RPQ application releases. And then at that time, we won't be able to correspond. So we would love to answer any of your questions that you may have leading up to our launch date. Thank you so much for your time today. I don't see any additional questions, and I would love to open the floor to anyone else that has anything else they would like to ask or say. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining our community workshop today. We appreciate your time. And we are going to head towards our next workshop, which is equity and contracting, which will be on April 4th from 11 to 1 p.m. And if you do notice, it is in our chat, the opportunity to engage with us in our next contracting workshop. Oh, I do see a raised hand. Scott.
Sorry for the delayed hand. I was just curious, if if Quest Center is a first-time applicant on, we do a lot of work with Multnomah County and Department of Health, but as we look at broadening service models, looking at some of this, the funding through ADVSD, so do we need to be, my question is around the databases that you identified, and that are those, if we aren't currently in all of those, do we need to be trained and utilizing those systems, or can we just have a plan to be part of those if we aren't already?
So Scott, this is Lynn. Was your question if your agency already uses those databases, is there additional training?
No, my question would be, as I'm not certain that we are actually hooked up to all of
I
those,
see.
because we don't typically, this would be sort of an expanded area of service.
Yes. So what happens? So is it around getting access to those?
Yeah.
And checking, yeah. So what happens is, as we move into the contracting and award phase, those conversations are happening. And then once contracts start, we have a user access team, part of our team that works on user access issues. And so making sure that all team members who are working, who needs to be in Get Care, who needs to be in Oregon Access, who needs UCR. There's also levels of credentials when you're getting into those. Are you someone in finance who needs to be in UCR to see the contract expenditures? Or are you a case manager and you need to be in UCR to do the client facing part of UCR and client database part of it? So we work with partners to get proper credentials and logins and so forth. The agency, our partners then have an obligation to alert us when an employee has changed roles or when an employee has left their job, things like that. So then we terminate those access points. Yes, and an organization might be in Oregon Access, for example, but are using it for something different for the purposes of our programs. And so those employees would be appropriately credentialed for their level of service of what it is they're doing. An agency might already provide health promotion and they already use Compass. And so they would be just connected to our network in Compass so that we would be able to see that data to validate invoices and also to compile our data as an area agency on aging. Does that answer your question, Scott?
It does specifically, but I think more broadly, my question would be, as a new agency providing sort of specific culturally responsive services to the community, part of our look at this would be the cost required to be able to begin a contract such as this through a new department at Multnomah County. And so that's what I guess I'm starting to sort of look at as how we would go about being able to estimate the cost as we start to begin to build. We have a program, but we don't, we currently, it's called our health improvement program, which so it would be health promotion that we're looking at. And it would be, and looking for ways to connect behavioral health with HVSD services.
And I heard you say something about cost, and I don't know if this is also part of your question. It might be for others. There's not a cost. You don't agencies don't have to get their own license, pay licensing fees or anything for access to these databases. You'd become part of our network. I think Compass is one example that you do have to pay a license for, but you would become part of our network. And so there's not a license that your agency would have to acquire to be in the Compass database for the purposes of this contract. But it is, thinking about that administrative burden, if the work that you're thinking about for this contract aligns with other work that your agency does, and thinking about that data entry requirement. And so you may have part of another grant or contract where you are entering data into this database, and your staff would now also have to enter information into one of these databases. Yes, it is true that that would be required if you are going to be doing the work of this contract and be paid for units of service. You do have to enter the data into the required databases. As you heard me mention, most of these are part of a statewide network, and so that is our obligation as the Area Agency on Aging to comply with kind of the statewide network work that is done.
And can some of that could be built into our administrative costs? Right. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Great question, Scott. Thank you for the great answer, Lynn. And I wanted to take a chance to just thank all of our presenters for their time, and thank you for all of the attendees for their time. A special thanks to our ASL interpreters for their time today, helping to make this an accessible presentation. And we look forward to having everyone in attendance at our next workshop, which is going to be more so of a community think tank, but we are going to have more information on how we are applying equity within this contracting phase that we are going through with the Community Services RFPQ for older adults. I would like to ask that all of the guest speakers that presented today would stand back on the presentation. And at this time, we would like to close and yield our time for everyone that is here attending the presentation with us. Thank you so much for your time today. Be well.